Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so this is, as you mentioned, just pretty much a close reading of La Ricotta after engaging with some of the scholarship around a couple of the key scenes, which I was a little unsatisfied with. Since Oshgor mentioned Tim Corrigan, actually this essay grew out of something I wrote for his course, so thanks, Tim. So in Pasolini's short film La Ricotta, which first appeared in 1963, it was part of an omnibus feature with 4 segments, unimaginatively titled Rogopag, taken from the names of all the directors who contributed, Rossellini, Godard, Pasolini, Gregoretti. It's a meta-cinematic parody, ridiculing Italian class society and its cultural elite. It is structured around a film within a film, with Orson Welles playing an arrogant director working on a cinematic Passion of Christ, running the set like a petty tyrant as he fanatically attempts to recreate 2 16th century Italian Mannerist paintings by forming elaborate tableaux vivants. La Ricotta follows a character named Stracci, who plays a minor role in the production and spends his time trying to secure food for him and his family in often humorous ways. If jokes abound, the film is also complex and reflexive, offering a serious critique of an increasingly invasive new form of capitalism, preying upon the perhaps romanticized archaism and innocence of the Roman countryside during the post-war so-called economic miracle. Pasolini's dark portrayal of an Italian society in transition ends with Stracci, who plays the good thief in this Christ play, dying of indigestion during filming on the cross. So this fast-paced tragic comedy is usually read for its clever, comical reworking of biblical and art historical themes. As such, many critics and academics focused on 2 scenes in particular, the religious tableau vivant I just mentioned, and another shot which opens and closes the film and is often described as a still life. The interest in these hyper-stylized moments is partially explained by the fact that these are the only ones in the film to be shot in color, and it was actually Pasolini's first use of Technicolor. And so here, basically, I'm looking to reread these 2 scenes in relation to a couple other important ones to argue that there's more at work here than some intertextual nods and that they are central to the film's politics. The focus on art historical and biblical questions, I think, minimizes some of the very contemporary questions that Pasolini is engaging. These concerns are laid out in an article he wrote 10 years later for the Corriere della Sera, in which he describes a new post-war form of fascism, a clash between what he calls pluralist archaism on the one hand and industrial equalization on the other, arguing that models imposed by the center attack the values, souls, actions, languages, and bodies of the people. He here objects to a project of national unification through capitalist modernization and homogenization, a project which entails the crushing of the rich, in particular, Italian peasant and sub-proletarian cultures he celebrates in his early films. The human, in Pasolini's dramatic terms, disappears from such a world as individuals are reduced to singular engines who throw themselves against one another. So in La Ricotta, as in Nakatone and Mamma Roma, Pasolini portrays an Italian society in transition, indeed even under attack. In this film, however, he goes further, interrogating the status of the image and cinema itself in this age he fears to be dominated by increasingly powerful mass media, consumerism, and conformism. And he even goes so far as to consider the possibility that his own practice might fall prey to the dynamics he portrays so well. As the film opens, importantly, with this shot in color, a happy group of actors in the film within the film dances to disco before a table covered with a splendid banquet. In the background, the idyllic hills of the Roman periphery sprawl. A stationary shot then lingers on the grapes and ricotta cheese of the table's idealized spread. With its careful composition, soft color scheme, and archaic tinge, this picturesque opening contrasts sharply with the very next shot. After a jump cut, a close-up of Stracci's face is offered in black and white, and it dominates the frame. He already appears in pain, foreshadowing his death. More importantly, this opening introduces us to one of the central themes of the film, the division, which is highlighted by the differential use of color throughout it, between the spectacular hedonistic world of the film's stars and that of Strachey, the sub-proletarian man, only out to satiate his own hunger and that of his family. So Strachey is playing the good thief, as I mentioned, but he's only an extra, not a real actor, which is a sort of clever making literal of his marginal position as an excess member of society, part of a surplus population. And if the joke wasn't clear, Strachey means rags in Italian. As he will put it later to another actor, his vocation is to die of hunger. But before going on with some of the plot, I want to more fully consider the meaning of these opening shots of the banquet table, which will recur throughout the film, including at the very end. So numerous writers have called attention, of course, to Pasolini's engagement with mostly Italian art history in his works, arguing that his studies under the renowned art historian Roberto Lunghi at Bologna University influenced the visual style of many of his films, the most famous of which may be one of the final shots of Mamma Roma with young Ettore in prison, bound to a wooden bed and dying in a manner reminiscent of Mantegna's Lamentation over the Dead Christ. It should thus come as no surprise that critics analyzing La Ricotta might be looking for Pasolini's cinematization of art historical images, as Jill Murphy refers to it. A number of critics and academics have read this shot of the banquet as a still life, pointing to it as a further evidence of Pasolini's fondness for art historical winks. Murphy writes that this trestle table laden with food is reminiscent of a Dutch 17th century still life painting. Although no specific memento mori is present, as is conventional in such paintings, the array of ripe fruits may be read as a subtle vanitas indicating the transience of life. So while the connection here is surely a good one, French theorist Georges Didier Huberman might offer a further avenue of interpretation. He has a wonderful 2009 book called The Survival of the Fireflies, in which he discusses La Ricotta in relation to Debord's notion of the society of spectacle, describing what he calls the fierce projectors of an image-based capitalism and the way in which the shiny commodities and manicured media of a nascent consumer culture blind us, colonizing social life to an ever greater degree. So I think this opening image might be read as offering what Didier Huberman calls luminous images, which contribute to make of us enslaved peoples hypnotized in their flux. This bright, enticing image is not unlike thousands of others we see daily in our age of the, and this is Huberman again, calculated proliferation of images used at the same time as vehicles of propaganda and merchandise. It may well be a still life, but with its enticing cheese bathing in light like so much merchandise in a store window, it might also be read as a sign of abundance and excess, a false image offered by a manipulative consumer society. The ricotta on the table, like the ricotta that Strachey will later buy and eat, is, after all, a commodity. Is this a still life, we might ask, or an advertisement? That is the shot meant to recall a work of art or a set of commodities? I think the ambiguity here might be the point, as Pasolini deals with the fear that in the age of what he calls televisual neo-capitalism, the two are increasingly indistinguishable, and further that his own work might not escape such a dynamic. This sort of Frankfurt School problematic runs through the film, which reckons with commodification, or more broadly, systems' relentless colonization of life world. Pasolini's response here, turning to self-reflexivity, recalls another contributor to the omnibus film of which La Ricotta is a part, which is Godard, of course. The prettiness of this first image is immediately subverted by the black and white image of Strachey in pain, which follows, and the jump cut which links them induces, I'm thinking of Laura Mulvey here yesterday, one hesitates to say it, but a Brechtian estrangement effect, calling attention to the filmic apparatus itself. Pasolini encourages the viewer to see through the manipulative techniques of cinema as they serve, as Huberman noted, for vehicles of propaganda and merchandise. So Pasolini's concern with capital's encroachment on the realm of art is mirrored by his preoccupation with the way capitalist modernity preys on the peripheral, organic spaces of Roman life. La Ricotta stages a clash between the bourgeoisie, the famous actors, the director, and the jet set, which will later arrive to get a sneak peek at the film, which we'll see later. And on the other hand, those left out without a slice of the banquet like Strachey. A. El Duque writes of La Ricotta that hunger might be conceived both as the desire of the character and as the driving force behind the plot. Strachey first collects his ration as a worker for the film, promptly gives that food to his family, later dresses as a woman in order to collect a second meal, which he hides in a cave. He discovers that the leading actress's dog, which we are told at one point feeds on caviar, has eaten this meal. He then sells this dog, which he steals, to a journalist who has come on set to interview the director. And here's where I want to pick my analysis back up, because what follows, I think, is one of the most interesting sequences of the film. So as Strachey makes this deal, the moment the money exchanges hands, his actions are sped up as he sprints to buy a chunk of cheese double time. I read this sequence as a hyperbolic representation of the corrosive effects of capitalist social relations crystallized in this image here, in the act of commodity exchange on subjects who had formerly escaped their grip. Strachey's rapid mechanical movements seem to suggest that he has now been subjected to the rhythms and demands of capitalist modernity, man reduced to a singular engine, as Pasolini called it. Charlie Chaplin's factory worker in modern times comes to mind here. The very moment Pasolini seems to suggest that Strachey begins to partake in market relations, something of the organic relationality of the Roman subject to his surroundings is lost, perhaps irrevocably. Consider the spaces through which Strachey runs. First, following a dirt path, he crosses the large open field in which his family had earlier been enjoying a picnic. Ancient ruins and a number of sheep contribute to this image of a fading oasis in the midst of a neo-capitalist desert, as Vezia describes it. Pasolini again only offers the viewer this picturesque landscape for a moment. Soon Strachey reaches a highway, the illusion is broken, and he begins to run alongside it as cars pass him by. Both on the way to the cheese stall and the way back, Strachey passes a group of men exercising here along the side of the road, their uniform regulated motions contributing further to the portrayal of capitalism's disciplinary power over the body. When Strachey finally does settle into his hiding spot to eat his hard-earned ricotta, he is immediately called back to the set in order to continue filming. In the next shot, we are shown the megaphone which announces this order, which is mounted atop the same banquet table with which the film opens, linking the demands of the boss here to the society of spectacle. And I would like to note that this same image of the banquet table recurs once more, serving as the final shot of the film. In his book on Pasolini's Rome, John David Rhodes argues that the recurring image of the borgata, that is the social housing in the Roman suburbs, the borgata on the horizon in Mama Roma, a recurring shot, serves as an ideological image rather than a diegetic one, by which he simply means it does not enrich the narrative of the film, but strengthens the ideological message insofar as these can be separated. I would argue that this shot of the banquet table serves a similar purpose, just as the shot in Mama Roma appears after the death of Ettore, as though the social housing is somehow responsible. After Strachey's death, we are again shown the commodity-laden table, as though this symbol of consumer seduction and excess is the guilty party. But before getting to the end just yet, I want to consider the other scenes which are shot in color here. These are scenes which are intercut with Strachey's storyline, as Wells, the Orson Welles character, attempts to film his actors forming flawless tableaux vivants, which resemble two paintings, Rosso Fiorentino's Descent from the Cross from 1521 and Pontormo's Entombment from 1525. This is the Pontormo and the tableau vivant. Humor permeates these mise en scène. As they attempt to do it, one actor picks his nose. At one point, disco music, rather than the classical chords demanded, is played. And finally, the amateur actors cannot hold their positions and the entire scene collapses. Jill Murphy interprets all this as representing something like the Bakhtinian carnivalesque, in which the realm of the sacred comes crashing down to the profane, and traditional hierarchies are inverted, as Pasolini celebrates the subproletarian over the elite. I think this fits, this is right. The controlling director comes off looking ridiculous in his failure to execute his vision, and Strachey last shall be first, when it becomes clear he is a Christ figure, dying on a cross, being about as Christ-like as one gets. Murphy then argues that Pasolini's nod to the Mannerist can be explained by the fact that he identifies himself with them because, like them, he seeks a new formal language through citation, because Orson Welles, as the director, at one point quotes from Pasolini's own poem, Poesie Mondana, as he has a copy of a book entitled Mama Roma in front of him. And again, I think all this is right insofar as it goes, but that the focus on biblical and art historical references only gets half the picture. The use of color in these later scenes links them to the earlier one. In revealing what goes on behind the scenes in the creation of the film within the film, Pasolini once more calls attention to cinematic production itself. If the still life serves to put the question of the commodification of art on the table, here Pasolini goes one step further, revealing that films, commodities like any other, cannot escape the logic of commodity fetishism, and in fact may be the result of a production process which is just as exploitative. The angels on screen here form a hilarious contrast with the man behind the camera. The most exaggerated representation of this comes when filming must come to a halt for a moment when the sun passes behind a cloud, and the director orders the crew to leave the actors tied to the crosses in the meantime. And later when Welles tells the journalist with a straight face, for capital, the labor force only exists to serve production, and the producer of the film is the owner of your newspaper. This corruption becomes clearer in the final scene, which returns us to the set of the film, where a band is playing, performing for a Roman jet set of bourgeois elites, the press, the producer of the film, politicians, actors, etc., who have all come to catch a privileged glimpse of Welles's film. They are here for a spectacle, and they will get one, but not the one they expect. For what little remained of the uncontaminated space of the countryside has now been fully overrun. The film opens with a quote from the gospel in which Jesus says, do not make of my Father's temple a bank, right, this bit, so the moneylenders are in the temple. And that's the image we have here, I think. And in Didi Uberman's term, the fierce lights of the projectors are here in full force. So the two forms of what I called colonization earlier merge here. Art has become pure, spectacular commodity, and the final spaces of organic Roman life have been trampled. As Vezia writes, these corrupt individuals gather before a lengthy banquet table for a gastronomic feast and subsequently obliterate the social and physical divide between the city and its outlying grasslands. The mytho-poetic world that Pasolini presented in his two previous films has been vanquished. Instead, he offers here a cinematic lament against the cultural destruction wrought by commercial homogenization and bourgeois values. End quote. So everything here is spectacle. Paparazzi snap pictures of the posing elite. Welles shouts orders as fake thunder and lightning crash. And Didi Uberman writes, in this age of industrial and consumerist dictatorship, everybody shows off like merchandise in a window. The show they have come to see, however, is interrupted, for when it comes time for Strachey to deliver his line, he is silent, having gotten his hands on some ricotta finally, eaten it too quickly, and died. Pasolini thus figures the destruction of his beloved marginal Roman life as nothing short of a crucifixion. While scholars typically chalk up Strachey's death to indigestion, it might be fair to call it overconsumption. Having finally gotten his longed for slice of the seductive still life, it proves not to bring the promised happiness, revealing the hollowness of modernization's supposed miracle for those on the periphery. But is the joke on him? El Duque writes that this death takes the form of a posthumous rebellion, as Strachey's demise assaults the political, social, and narrative rules of the film set. Invisible to the elite so far, in death, Strachey demands to be seen, breaking through appearances and highlighting the falsity of the entire pretty production. Thus, Welles's final line, poor Strachey, dying was his only way of showing us that he was alive. For Didi Uberman, this final image offers the viewer an experience which still manages to transmit itself beyond all the spectacles which are bought and sold around us, thus breaking, in some fashion anyway, with the logic of commodification Pasolini feared his film may not be able to escape. Yeah, that's it.